Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel and the United States push back as Al-Jazeera blames Israel for systematically targeting their staff and outlets in the region. Meanwhile, the space-age Iron Beam defense system getting some serious developmental backing. And finally, the Avatar is here, Israel's Government Innovation Authority and university-driven autonomous vehicle hitting the streets. In a shock to the world, the Al-Jazeera network now filing a claim against Israel at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. But both Israel and the United States were quick to denounce the move, as Al-Jazeera is not just calling to investigate the death of journalist Shirin Abu Akleh, but also Israel's allegedly and systematic targeting of Al-Jazeera entities and staff. The United States now blasting Qatari news outlet Al Jazeera for pitching the killing of Palestinian-American journalist Shirin Abu Akleh to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Now, the ICC is not obliged to take on every case, but anyone can file a complaint. And in this case, Al Jazeera is claiming to have detailed evidence allegedly proving that Israeli military forces deliberately shot Abu Akleh during clashes in Judea and Samaria with Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists in May.
There can be no reason now, we say, not to take the next step, which is to investigate, find the persons responsible, and charge them. There's no obstacle. Of course, the prosecutor would have to go to the judges to request those arrest warrants, but that's what needs to take place now.
Furthermore, Al Jazeera is claiming the death as part of a systematic campaign by Israel against Al Jazeera, including the bombing of Al Jazeera's offices in Gaza during a war with Hamas. Israel showing, however, that Hamas had stationed military equipment in the building and called on all Al Jazeera staff to evacuate before the strike. Then as for Abu Akleh, both Israel and the United States concluding their investigations into her death over the summer, saying that Israeli forces more than likely fired the killing shot, but that due to the Palestinian Authority's interference, conclusive results could not be inferred. For one, the Palestinian Authority immediately confiscated Abu Akleh's body from the field, removed the bullet, and withheld evidence from international investigators, which completely hampered proper ballistics probes and other examinations. In any case, even if responsible, Israel outright denying any intentional targeting of the journalist. Additionally, neither the U.S. nor Israel are members to the ICC, with the latter also questioning the court's jurisdiction. So Israeli authorities likewise repeating promises never to subject Israeli forces to the political whims of outsiders, even friendly nations like the United States. Prime Minister Lapid saying no one will investigate IDF soldiers and no one will preach to us about morals in warfare, especially not Al Jazeera.
הממשלה נותנת גיבוי מלא ללוחמים שלנו. אנחנו לא נאפשר חקירות של גורמים זרים, אנחנו לא נקבל הכפשות של חיילי צה"ל ולוחמי שב"כ ומג"ב שמסכנים את חייהם יום-יום כדי לשמור על מדינת ישראל ואזרחי ישראל. ידע כל לוחם, אם הוא שומר על החוק ועל הפקודות, תמיד יהיה לו גב רחב מאיתנו. אתם שומרים עלינו, אבל גם אנחנו שומרים עליכם.
And U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price saying that the Biden administration opposes the move as well, not least because, quote, the ICC should focus on its core mission, which is serving as a court of last resort in punishing and deterring atrocity crimes, end quote. And now with more on the Al Jazeera filing against Israel at the ICC, CEO and founder of the Shurat Adin Israel Law Center, attorney Nitsana DarshanLeitner. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, given the lack of evidence and provenance of evidence in the investigation of Abu Akleh's death, neither Israel nor the United States could conclude that Israel definitively shot her. So what could Al Jazeera have to prove Israel's guilt, let alone intent?
Nothing. They don't have nothing but the will and the desire to bash Israel and to bring its soldiers to the International Criminal Court just in order to have another victory for the Palestinians in this biased court. If you want to prove that this crime was a war crime, because this is under the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, you have to prove that this is a systematic crime. This is a crime that is done intentionally. This is a crime that is known to be committed by your defendant. However, if you examine the powers that were standing there at that day, you would see that on one hand, you have militias, terrorists wearing no insignia, holding illegal weapon, have a history of killing innocent people. Prior to this killing, there were many terror attacks done in Israel by these militias, by the Al-Aqsa brigades, by the PLO brigades, by ISIS brigades, all concentrated in the Jenin camp, versus IDF soldiers, which is working very, very under the moral rules, under the law of war, are wearing insignias. They are not widely opening fire on anybody. This is on one hand. On the other hand, you have no bullet. You have no way to prove who shot the bullet. We know that the Palestinians held this bullet for many, many months until they finally turned it into the hands of the American. And there was a reason why they kept the bullet for so long. Not only it was damaged and there was no way to prove, but it shows, the one that hides evidence shows who's to blame. And therefore, we in Shurat Adin already went and filed a working complaint against the Palestinians, against Mahmoud Abbas, who was in charge of the Palestinians, for the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. It was not the Israelis who do that.
All right, so I want to focus now, as stated earlier, neither Israel nor the United States are parties to the ICC. So what exactly is the jurisdiction over Israel? How can it properly conduct an investigation, even if it chose to take up Al-Jazeera's filing, and what could the consequences be?
Unfortunately, the International Criminal Court is taking jurisdiction that it does not have. The State of Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court. Neither the Palestinians are not a state. In order to be a member, you have to be a state member. The Palestinians, under the international law, do not have a state. Nevertheless, the previous prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, decided that she wants to open investigation against Israel, and she compelled the Rome Treaty and forced the courts to accept the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians into the ICC. The judges, not less biased than Fatou Bensouda, agreed with her, and this is how they gain jurisdiction. It's illegal, but there is no appellate division on the International Criminal Court, and there is no world body that can judge it. So now they have jurisdiction.
Well, and I have to play. Well, I just wanted to play devil's advocate here as well. Given the UN's history of bias, including UN Middle East envoy Tor Wensland's heartfelt condolences to the family of a Palestinian terrorist last week, I can certainly understand why Israel would not want to join certain bodies like the ICC. But if the evidence is in Israel's favor, would it not be in Israel's best interest to play ball, at least to a degree, or is Israel right in rejecting allegations and investigation?
Israel will not be facing this individual case. If Israel agrees to the jurisdiction, the court will be able to investigate all the cases that the Palestinians allege Israel committed. And we know what will be the outcome of this judgment, and therefore Israel will not be a member in the court. It's not one incident. They want to open it further up from 2014, even previously. There is no chance and there is no way to get a fair trial.
But Nitsana, I want to thank you again so much for joining us. It was an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you very much.
Anti-Semitism in the United States rising dramatically, prompting the White House to take action. So Second Gentleman Douglas Emhoff, the husband of Vice President Kamala Harris, convening a special roundtable today, bringing together top officials in the Biden administration and heads of major American Jewish organizations. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reporting.
The second gentleman, Douglas Emhoff, will convene a roundtable with Jewish leaders from across the country. The roundtable will include leaders of Jewish organizations fighting anti-Semitism that represents the wide range of Jewish community, from students to seniors, and including Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox denominations.
The Jewish second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, is generally behind the scenes, but he is outspoken on the issue of anti-Semitism, saying his time on the job has made him more sensitive to the threats facing Jews.
Of course, I'm going to speak up and speak out about anti-Semitism, and we are experiencing a lot of it very publicly right now, some in my hometown in Los Angeles. We're coming up on the 4-year anniversary of Tree of Life. We know what could happen.
Anti-Semitic expression is spiking following Elon Musk's removal of content controls on Twitter, including the vicious anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial espoused by rapper Kanye West. The Department of Homeland Security says that the Jewish community faces a persistent and lethal threat. Social commentators have been emotionally weighing in.
This ill-educated monster who is only in it for himself, that can no longer stand. He will not be allowed to normalize white supremacy in this world, and he will not be allowed to normalize Adolf Hitler, the monster of all monsters who killed factually 6 million Jews and up to 5 million other people. Do you understand?
Following an FBI report citing a 6% rise in anti-Semitic hate crimes, Congress is also weighing in. A bipartisan list of 125 lawmakers from both chambers is calling on the Biden administration to adopt a whole-government approach to combating anti-Semitism.
Turning now to politics, where coalition partners are still trying to finalize their agreements before Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu's December 11 deadline. And overnight, Netanyahu's Likud signing an interim deal with the ultra-Orthodox United Torah Judaism. In the UTJ agreement, the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox Party will receive control of the Housing and Construction Ministry, the Ministry of Jerusalem Affairs and Jewish Heritage, the chairmanship of the powerful Knesset Finance Committee, and several other Knesset bodies. That said, Netanyahu has yet to finalize the agreements with all of his likely partners, so Netanyahu is still widely expected to ask President Isaac Herzog for a 14-day extension to form his government, and Herzog is largely expected to agree to it, despite calls from the coming opposition to reject Netanyahu's request. In the meantime, the emerging coalition of 64 Knesset members to the 120-member Knesset is taking control of Knesset business. On Monday, they are expected to elect a new Knesset speaker to replace Miki Levy from outgoing Prime Minister Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid, and with that, they'll introduce legislation necessary to uphold other coalition agreements, including the appointment of Shas leader Aryeh Deri to a ministry portfolio despite his criminal history. And now with more on politics and diplomacy, political correspondent with the Jerusalem Post, Eliav Brower. Eliav, thank you so much for being with us. Now, Netanyahu will likely need to ask for an extension for negotiations, but he'll have to prove to President Herzog that there is a need. Do you think that Herzog will give the okay? And if so, will he give the full 2 weeks that he can provide?
Yes, I definitely think that President Herzog will give the okay, and the question remains: will he give the full 2 weeks or not? Usually, the precedent has been that if an extension is given, it's given for the whole 2 weeks. But he could decide to give less than that if he's convinced that that could benefit the forming of the government and make it go faster. And yes, they did. Part of the reason why Netanyahu and the Haredi Ashkenazi party signed a deal yesterday and were rushing to do so was to present to President Herzog that one more deal had been signed, so as to better improve their case to receive the extension.
All right, so UTJ is more or less on board now, as you've mentioned, with an interim agreement, but they say that they still need to hammer out fundamental issues before signing a full deal with the Likud. What issues might these be?
So there are three major issues. The first one, and perhaps the most important, is the issue of Haredi drafting into the IDF. This has been an issue for many, many years, and it's partly the reason why this whole election cycle began. And at the end of 2018, the government, after the first election, the government couldn't form a government because of the lack of agreement on this clause. The Haredi parties basically want to ensure that no one will be forced to be drafted in the military. That's the bottom line. And that whoever wishes to continue learning will be able to do so. The second provision is about the Haredi private education system, where the Haredi parties are demanding in advance to know exactly, they want to raise the funding and they want to know exactly what the mechanism is going to be to increase funding for the private school systems, irrespective of whether they teach a core curriculum or not. And the third issue is the override clause, which is the clause that will enable the Knesset to override high court rulings, which is something that all of the other parties want. The question is exactly what the devil's in the details.
Right, and how many Knesset members it would take to enact the override. So more to that point, critics are blasting Netanyahu for conceding too much to his Haredi and far-right backers, saying that the new government will create a theocracy in some cases. Is there anything to this claim, or is it a slippery slope fallacy in action?
I think that it's a little bit of a slippery slope fallacy because a theocracy is going a little bit too far. What I do think is that there might be more signs on the ground for religious or more traditional aspects, such as in the education system, especially in the education system, where we might see certain programs. But no, we're not on the way to a theocracy. I think we can calm down.
So, all right, my final question. In other news, unverified reports are suggesting that Saudi officials are indicating to the U.S. that normalization with Israel is closer than we think, and that the Palestinian issue is not among the roadblocks. Do you think that this is the sort of thing that might be among Bibi's campaign promises, and how many promises can he uphold?
Yeah, how many promises he can uphold? The answer is infinity. Uphold not many, but he can give as many promises as he wants. But I think that the Saudi a deal with Saudi Arabia could be huge, and it's a real possibility, and it would definitely be a big success for Netanyahu. The question is, what peace will it be? Will it be a warm peace or will it be a cold peace? And if for the future, will the Palestinian issue remain an issue? Yes. But will it stand as a barrier for peace with Saudi Arabia? Not necessarily.
All right, Eliav Brauer, thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Moving on, a major parental concern from the days of the pandemic now put to rest by a recently published Israeli study. Were you or a baby you know born during the coronavirus pandemic? Well, fear not about your psyche, because a newly published Israeli study is now surprising psychologists in showing that babies' bonds with their parents, and particularly their mothers, unaffected by the outbreaks and the lockdowns. Initially, experts feared that the stress of the unstable environment and social upheaval would distract from and damage the bonding process. So when the pandemic reached Israel's shores in early 2020, researchers diverted a study that they had already begun to focus on this issue. By studying the interactions between 110 mothers and their babies both before and during the pandemic, the Ben-Gurion University scientists reporting that mother-infant emotional availability were not negatively impacted by the pandemic at all. In fact, the peer-reviewed study concluding that infants' development is far more sturdy than previously assumed. That said, given the small sample and the scope of the study, psychologist Dr. Noah Guerancela, who ran the study, acknowledging that the full picture of infants' emotional development was not captured and that this only suggests averages. Pollution, scandal, and fear no more. Haifa residents pleased to hear that the overhaul of their city, including the removal of industrial centers in favor of housing, beaches, and parks, is now officially underway. At long last, and in light of severely harmful pollution, the outgoing Israeli government moving forward with its Haifa-based strategic development plan.
אנחנו לוקחים אזור מזוהם שאנשים ועסקים היום נרתעים מלחיות בו, להסתובב בו, לפעול בו, שהפך זה לא רק החצר האחורית של כל הצפון, זה החצר האחורית של מדינת ישראל, ובמקום זה, מה שטלי תיארה בפניכם היא פנינה בהתהוות.
The multi-billion-dollar strategy outlined on March 6th earlier this year, but only now beginning to take action. Outgoing Prime Minister Yair Lapid opening the first working conference on advancing the plan on Tuesday at the Prime Minister's office, alongside all of the relevant authorities. And as part of the strategy, Lapid laying out the vision for a completely reinvigorated coastline, complete with parks, local economic development, new housing, and tourism.
ובמקום המפעלים יהיה פארק ירוק ועצום ממדים לאורך נחל הקישון, ובמקום מכלי נפט יהיו לנו שכונות ומלונות וחופי רחצה, ובמקום עשרות אלפי דונמים של שטחים בלב המטרופולין, שאף אחד לא רוצה היום לגור בהם, בגלל הזיהום, בגלל החומרים המסוכנים, יבנו יותר מ100,000 יחידות דיור, שיסייעו גם לתת תשובה למצוקת הדיור בישראל.
Until now, the Haifa Bay practically synonymous with nearby residents' misery under the bombardment of harsh pollutants, environmental violations, and scandal. In fact, just recently, a study published in August linking the Haifa Bay pollution to sharply increased risk of cancer. And in July, the Environmental Protection Ministry filing criminal indictments against subsidiaries of Israel's Bazan oil conglomerate for pumping out roughly 100 tons of harmful gases into the air in violation of its licenses and permits. The same company, by the way, repeatedly hit with massive fines for similar violations and toxic leaks in recent years. And all this to say nothing of the 8 decades of waste that's been seeping into the soil and nearby groundwater. So as Lapid saying at the meeting, this is a milestone event. Straight out of Star Wars, Israel's newest high-energy laser weapon system will be developed in the U.S. and Israel. The Iron Beam is a co-production of the United States-based Lockheed Martin and Israel's Rafael Defense Systems. And to see it in action, ILTV's Steve Leibowitz reporting.
We've all heard of the Iron Dome defense system, used so successfully by the Israeli army against terrorist rocket fire from Gaza. The next generation of air defense is Iron Beam. Iron Beam is designed to be the first ever operational system for ground-based air defense against threats, including rockets, mortars, and UAVs. It can be used to counter incoming threats while defending critical infrastructure and population centers. Rafael has been working on the system for the past 3 decades. Lockheed says it intends to leverage decades of defense technology expertise to produce Iron Beam both efficiently and effectively. Lockheed Martin says it looks forward to entering the high-energy laser era with the highly effective systems developed by Rafael in Israel.
The government-developed autonomous vehicle Avatar is ready to roll, financed by the Israel Innovation Authority and the Ministry of Transportation. The sensor fusion-based autonomous vehicle, the Avatar, is now 3 years into development, and it looks absolutely amazing. The Avatar conducted a full-scale demonstration of its capabilities, including the building of creating holistic pictures for decision-making while riding in autonomous vehicles. Further, as part of the demonstration, the integrated systems were placed in a laboratory test vehicle, though later the systems will be transferred to the Renault Nissan Mitsubishi Innovation Lab in Tel Aviv for further testing before eventually integrating them into the 3 companies' vehicles and future services. Now finally, the Avatar Consortium is a gathering of industry partners and research institutions, all working on technologies for autonomous vehicles traveling in urban environments. 7 leading Israeli tech companies and academic entities are involved, including Cognata, Elbit, and Adas, as well as the Technion, the Weizmann Institute, and the universities of Tel Aviv, Haifa, Ben Gurion, and Ariel. Now it's time to pack your bags and head on over, because despite the impressions gathered in the media, Israel is actually one of the safest countries in the world for visiting tourists. A recent study by a leading insurance comparison website finding that Israel is the 5th safest among the 50 most visited countries on Earth. In fact, Israel is safer than the United States, ranked 30th, Canada in 21st place, Australia in 18th, France at 15th, and England 10th. And the study is based on trusted international NGOs, including the World Health Organization, with data analyzed including all sorts of potential dangers from terrorism and carjackings to unintentional poisoning and traffic accidents. So overall, Israel's safety index was given a grade of A, with only Holland, Switzerland, Denmark, and Singapore receiving a higher mark of A+. The dubious distinction of the most dangerous of the 50 nations, meantime, going to South Africa by a wide margin. And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight, the forecast calling for partly cloudy skies around the country with an average low of about 10 degrees Celsius or 50 Fahrenheit. And then tomorrow, we can expect clear skies with cooler top temperatures of 21 Celsius or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all of your devices, check out our ILTV channels on YouTube, Facebook, and Telegram, and subscribe to our ILTV newsletter. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.